Welcome back. I'm Barry Craig. When the Confederates attacked Paducah in March of 1864, the city's defenders included a group of men who were literally fighting for their freedom. They were the 8th United States Heavy Artillery Colored, an African-American regiment. They were stationed inside Fort Anderson. A group of Paducans is working on a program to suitably memorialize these soldiers, and with us today is the prime mover in that movement, Betty Dobson. Welcome to the program. Say welcome back. And John Robertson, Paducah's premier historian, and to John Iles, we'll say welcome back.
Okay.
Betty, let's start by just tell us what your group is wanting to do in terms of a memorial to the 8th Artillery.
Well, the group is called the Friends of the 8th, and it is our goal to raise funds for a historical marker that we'll place at about where the encampment for the soldiers was located. It's in the loop near the convention center.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And plans are at first to get a plaque, a Kentucky Historical Society plaque.
Yes.
And then if that works well, then your next step would be something much more elaborate. Tell us about that.
Well, we've made contact with Ed Hamilton, who is a sculptor from Louisville, Kentucky, who did the Buffalo Soldier monument that's in Washington, D.C., and recently was noted for his sculpture of Lincoln that was also in Louisville. He said that he would love to work with us. So hopefully we will be able to bring Mr. Hamilton along and develop a park and also a regiment.
Mm-hmm. And have you been working with the city to some extent about this?
Our chairman, Jim Hanks, has been working with someone. We found out like the last Friday morning, that we were able to put the plaque on the grounds that we were wanting. So that was a good thing. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. John, tell us about the Battle of Paducah. Not as large or as famous as, say, Gettysburg or Vicksburg, but nonetheless a battle.
Well, I would disagree with a battle. The definition of a battle is where the main column or the main force of each side is engaged. And the only one of those in Kentucky, of course, was
Perryville, I guess.
Perryville.
Yeah. So it'd be a raid then, maybe more properly.
It was a raid, and he never intended to occupy Paducah. If you think about it, at the time, the fighting was in front of Atlanta, and they cut him loose to move north and to disrupt supply lines.
And that would be General Forrest.
And that would be General Nathan Bedford Forrest,
right.
The former slave trader, one of the preeminent military tacticians the Confederates actually had, as he proved on a couple of occasions. But he also was, I think, deliberately trying to make an example that would prevent the further enlistment of blacks into the Union Army. And of course, when that first started in 1863, Kentucky was exempt because we were one of the states that, if you read the Emancipation Proclamation, the slave states that were loyal were exempt, and a couple of parishes in Louisiana.
Right.
So they said as long as they could fill their quotas without resorting to recruiting blacks, that would suffice. But now in 1864, that all changed, and it changed here at Paducah. The adjutant general came to Louisville, and from there he telegraphed back that he was ready to start recruiting blacks if they were willing to authorize it. And so this was different because this was aimed at Kentucky slaves. And a lot of people don't realize that because of Kentucky being a loyal slave state, slavery really did not end until after the Civil War was
Right.
long over.
13th Amendment. You're
13th
exactly
Amendment in
right.
December of 1865. So there's always this discrepancy between Kentucky events and the organizing of black regiments. So Forrest came north, and with him was a 3rd Kentucky, which was primarily from Paducah. And so they were coming home, and they were going to raid and disrupt and also make an example. I really think he was to make an example, because when he left here, he cut his Kentucky troops loose under Abe Buford and sent them all home on furlough. And by the way, they all came back on time. That's remarkable. And then he took his Mississippi troops and Tennessee troops, and he attacked Fort Pillow. And there he massacred blacks. You read the War of the official records of the War of the Rebellion. There's some horrible stories in there, like this cavalry officer in Confederate in the Confederate forces who was reporting that he got a direct order from Forrest to kill an 8-year-old boy. And he tried everything in the world he could not to, but Forrest said, if you don't shoot him, we'll shoot you. And so the atrocities there were to discourage the enlistment of blacks in the military.
So you think had Forrest's troops captured Fort Anderson, they may well have massacred the
Yes.
8th Artillery?
Very definitely.
The battle, of course, the fight here in Paducah. There are actually parts of Paducah where this. Now I always heard that when Forrest came up from Mayfield, that he sort of established a base of operations at what is now the Catterjohn Building. Is that true? In that grove of trees, I always heard
Yes.
That's what I heard.
He tied his horses there, and they advanced on foot down. But actually, he took up as his headquarters what was then Federal Hospital Number 2. Now, that's in the story in itself, because going back to 1795, the federal government established hospitals for the benefit of mariners on the river systems. And one was located in Louisville that had, I think it had 150 beds, and the one in Paducah was a duplicate of it on smaller scale. They had 50 beds. So we had here a federal hospital. And when Grant occupied Paducah, the first thing he did was to go to that point, because that was federal territory. That was owned by the federal government, and thereby he wouldn't be offending the neutral state of Kentucky. So, but that burned in about 1863, and so the primary defenses were built on the grounds. Fort Anderson was a redoubt. It was just a dug-out hole in the ground.
Right.
And
Now, is that what they called the Marine Hospital here?
it was
in
the
Paducah?
Marine Hospital,
Right.
yes. And the one in Louisville is being refurbished at the present time. So it's a beautiful occasion if somebody wants to see what it would look like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now, Betty, haven't you all done some research as to who was in the 8th Artillery, and you found a lot of Paducah people who are descended from those soldiers?
My family name is on the roster. My
Yes.
husband's family name is on the
Yeah.
roster.
Yeah.
I found the Landers. I'm a maiden name of Landers. That was on the roster. So, yeah, we have an exhibit within the Hotel Metropolitan that shows the names of people who had enlisted with the Heavy 8th Artillery. It's really moving when folks come in, especially around the 8th of August, and they have their families with them, and to be able to look at this name and say, you know, I wonder if that was my grandfather, great-grandfather, you know, so it's...
Since you
Very
mentioned the
nice.
Hotel Metropolitan, of course, Betty was the prime mover in preserving that very important, very historical building in Paducah. How's that going? Bring us up to date on that.
It's wonderful. It's we're open for anyone that wants to come by just giving a call. They can call me or the Visitors Bureau, and they'll get me in contact with you, and we'll do provide a tour for you. We also have characters that can be there for you. Maggie will take you on a tour if you like, or one
Who
of the
plays
buffalo.
Maggie?
I usually play
Oh, you do?
Maggie.
You're
And
being
very,
modest.
very well.
You're being
Thank
modest.
you. And we have coming up in April, we have the quilt show. We have Nedra Bond coming this year, and by popular demand, Dr. Alistine Adams, who
Was on my program.
yes,
before.
and
Right.
she has done extensive research on the Underground Railroad and the quilts of the Underground Railroad that she'll be speaking on. But the hotel is coming along. We're almost totally finished once we have our purple room done. And I don't know if you all know what the purple room is, but that's where the musicians actually played. You know, they couldn't play with inside the hotel. So we found out that they played or performed or warmed up before they went on their gigs in this little room that's out back. So we had roofs put on them. We've got them painted. We're going to do some mural work on the inside, and hopefully we're going to. The date's not really set yet, but this summer we're going to have like its grand opening.
Now, I had heard that Louis Armstrong stayed there. Tell us about that.
Well, I had visited with Miss Velma Hammock, who owned Hammock's Funeral Home,
Right.
and interviewed her, and she told me that he stayed in the hotel, and she thought that it was the room on the left-hand side that is called the best room upstairs. She said he played at the Irving Cobb, and they were really excited about going. And she also shared with me that he came back and he was a little down. They were not, could not use the bathrooms or
Right.
Eat
Couldn't
from
stay
the
there.
kitchen. And so she said that they were down, and she said that they were sitting around, and she said somebody started tickling the ivory on the piano, and she said, "Honey, you just moved on. You moved on. You couldn't dwell in that type of thing." But we know that he stayed there. And the interesting thing about Louis Armstrong is that he was discovered by Fate Maribel,
Absolutely.
who was a native Paducah.
Exactly.
And
I believe he's buried in Oak Grove, isn't he? Yeah.
And we found out that his, I'm not quite sure if it was a cousin or how it was a family member, but Mamie Burbridge, who owned the hotel at one point, was a relative of his. So I thought, well, that might be one of the reasons a lot of the big name folks stopped by, knowing Fate, knowing his family ran something, but just primarily because we were on the Chitlin circuit and was noted as the best place to stay when you were traveling.
Well, getting back to the 8th, John, when was it recruited, and were they men from Paducah, the surrounding area, or how were they recruited?
That's what makes it so unpopular with Kentuckians, because if a Kentucky slave joined, he was freed and his family were freed. So this was a big movement. It actually started out as on February the 26th. Well, anyhow, Lorenzo Thomas in 1864 in February,
General.
under the direction of Secretary Ward Stoughton, authorized recruitment. The 8th United States Heavy Artillery Covered was one of these units. And so it started out as one unit, and it was under Colonel Henry T. Berry. He had 319 to enlist. And then its name changed to United States Field Artillery, parentheses, Heavy. It at one time was called the 7th, and then it grew into when it became actually a regiment, it became the 8th Heavy Artillery. And by heavy, that meant that they were usually stationed in forts and garrisons and mounted the big field pieces, the 32-inch, or whatever, field artillery that could fire long distances. So there was a small group of them that they were an example throughout the recruitment of blacks throughout the Kentucky. And because of their success, other units were recruited. And so at one time they were under the control of Grant, the Army of the Tennessee, and then later they became under the control of the Army of the Ohio. And so they shifted the operations after about 1865 over more across the Tennessee River around Smithland. And they actually went out on a couple of skirmishes, like the Haddock's Ferry operation. They had about 400 men that went out as more or less as infantry with an Illinois unit, white, and they were trying to break up a collection of guerrillas operating in a little further eastern Kentucky.
Where is Haddock's Ferry?
I have no idea.
Well, I don't feel so bad because
no,
obviously it was over a river somewhere,
it's
but there are a lot of
somewhere up
rivers
in there.
around
I
here.
think it's, it's up on the...
We'll look it up.
Yeah, I've tried.
Yeah.
But then they had a little skirmish around Smithland. But so they started out as heavy artillery. And during the Battle of Paducah, by the way, commander of the fort was Colonel Hicks, who had been wounded seriously fighting. So he had been in heavy combat at Shiloh and other places. And he was opposed to recruiting blacks. But after the battle, he said they fought as valiantly as anybody else in the command.
I had read that. So, right.
And there was another thing that happened along that time that I ran across recently. In 1864, a young white woman from up in Michigan got on a train, apparently the I.C. Railroad, and came down to Cairo. And she was to be employed as one of the ladies to be in a hospital. The nurses were all male and they were military, but they were one of the ladies. Her name was Fife, Jenny Fife. And she got here just at time, she was in the building when Nathan Bedford Forrest established his headquarters there at what had been previously the courthouse. And she reported the battle from eyewitness account. And she talks about the black soldiers that had been wounded after the Confederates left, and how she was so impressed by them. She wasn't impressed by many people in Paducah. She thought that we were rather ignorant and thought that everybody in Paducah was sympathetic to the South. But she was impressed with the conduct in the hospital of the black soldiers. Now they had them.
Where did you run across this? I've never heard of this.
I've got it out for publication, so it's.
I look forward to reading
the
it.
book.
Yeah.
It was found by Vonnie Shelton
the
at
library.
the research librarian at here.
Wow.
And it's in the Lansing, Michigan University library.
Michigan Library. Wow.
And these letters have not really been used that much. And Jenny, by the way, she stayed. And after the war, she shifted over from the nurse to be the teacher of perhaps the first black school of the state of Kentucky.
Oh my goodness.
And where was that?
Right here.
Right here in Paducah. Wow.
Yes, and she stayed on here for a couple of years teaching and told how she was isolated and the community turned against her because of that. And then later, she goes down and helps found a couple of black universities. Dillard in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And she was the head of women services for the state of Louisiana. And then she goes out and helps found a university that still exists in Texas. So she spent the rest of her life dedicated to improving the condition of black Americans. Jenny Fife.
Wow.
Remarkable story.
And you've got an article coming out when or where in that?
Well, I don't know. It has not been accepted as yet, but it's been submitted
to
the Kentucky Historical Society.
well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. Yeah. Describe the physical layout. I know on the flood wall murals, there's an image of Fort Anderson that looks like a medieval castle. I mean, the walls they look huge.
Well, that's perspective.
I was going to say that's sort of a perspective thing. You being a photographer can appreciate
Well, that also happened because we were sitting at the restaurant there and having a cup of coffee, the artist and I, and on the back of a napkin, I drew that out, and he took it and ran with it.
So the fort wasn't that huge.
It was good size for a dirt redoubt.
But the walls looked to be 30 or 40 feet.
Yeah, but they were only shoulder high.
I was going to say, yeah.
But what the Confederates didn't know, if you read the account of the people who were here, like Ed Crossman, who led the attack against the fort after the man from the 3rd Kentucky was killed, Thompson.
Albert Thompson.
Thompson was hit by apparently an artillery shell, and one account said, well, he was knocked off his horse and his spine lay there and curled back and forth like a snake. Whatever it was, he was killed.
You know, that's an interesting story. Many years ago, when I was a newspaper reporter, when I was young and thin and had hair, that was a long time ago, I interviewed a barber in Golconda whose name was Fraley, and he told that story, and he said his grandfather was one of the Illinois troops in the fort, and that's exactly the way he described it, that the backbone was ripped completely out. I talked to a doctor many years ago, and he was a bit skeptical that would happen, that the way that, in any event. Then the other story was his horse.
Yes, was hit.
It was hit, and it's buried, in the curve there of where the loop comes around. So I think that's kind of an interesting story as well. And wasn't there a marker there that on one of those streets that showed where Thompson was killed?
Yes, still is.
Still there, yeah. And he was an attorney from Paducah, and supposedly his house was within sight of the fort.
Well, supposedly too, there's other things about that position that are historically significant. When Grant came to Paducah, there was not a single bridge across the Ohio River.
Yeah, yeah.
So the first thing he did was to build
a pontoon bridge.
Caesar, he brought a bridge with him.
Exactly.
And he built one, and it came across, there was a little island out from the fort.
I read that.
And you came to the island, and then from there over. So the island is no longer there. So the fort doesn't look today like it did back then.
Yeah.
And the fort was a 2-story building with a basement and brick. And we know what it looked like from the one in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it burned, the old Federal Hospital, then they relied on the redoubt.
Mm-hmm.
And so they camped out, and then they, in time of emergency, they would go to this open.
So the bivouac
redoubt
was outside the redoubt,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
when the Confederates attacked, they rushed into the fort and defended it.
And now something else that is significant, Nathan Bedford Forrest, even though he was a cavalry specialist, he saw to it that he had with him mounted infantry. Now the distinction is the weapons they carried. And Jenny Fife talks about seeing all the cavalrymen coming in with these pistols. And that's true. But he also had a whole bunch of people with 58 caliber infield rifles. And so they got up in 2-story houses and fired out into the fort. And that's where a lot of the casualties were.
Right.
And of course the black soldiers serving the cannon had to stand up. Mm-hmm. And they were subjected to fire, and they served under heavy fire.
Was it after the battle they cleared those houses out?
Oh yeah, They took the 16th Cavalry, which was a Paducah unit,
Yeah.
and went out and burned their own houses.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. Well, now the site of Fort Anderson today, I read that after the Civil War, that area was heavily filled in, and that the actual site of the fort is quite a few feet below the surface. Is that true?
Well, I don't know, and I know an archaeologist who would blame everybody in Paducah for what they did to the site. And he's right. That has been desecrated. And it should have been handled over to Murray and to Ken Karstens and Kit Wexler and others, and properly looked into, because it was a significant historical site.
Well, the actual side of the fort was where the old Riverside Hospital was.
About there, yeah.
And we do
that's
have
where the marker is. But
there used to be a marker in the sidewalk there, wasn't
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
those markers in the sidewalk were all put in about the same time.
Yeah.
In the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah.
And some of them are very inaccurate, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah. Like Chief Paducah, but that's another story.
Well, that and also about somebody from here designing the CSS Virginia.
Right. I remember that one. Oh, that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
he's actually helped build another one,
Yeah.
but not that one. Anyway,
Well, in defense of the historical side, they're a lot more rigorous now than they used to be
Yes.
about these markers, because the Chief Paducah grave marker was my all-time favorite, which I believe was quietly removed.
well, there were two Chief Padukes. Well, a lot of people don't realize that. There was the legendary one, and then there was a tavern drunk. They used to sweep him out every night, you know, and and he was probably Cherokee, so they called him the Paducah Indian. And he died, indigent, and he wasn't Christian, he wasn't Jewish, and so what do you do with a body? So they picked him up and took him out on 3rd Street and threw him under a pile of logs, and that officially is how the city got rid of him.
Is that where that
Yes,
marker
and
was?
there's a little note in the special collections at the public library by Mrs. Muckwit, telling her as a child she'd go by there and she was afraid that the ghost of Chief Paducah would get her. So these two legends have sort of mingled with each
I
other.
hadn't heard that. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Betty, very quickly, give us some contact information for your group if people are interested, would like to help out.
Well, anyone that would like to help us could contact Jim Hanks, who is our chairperson at his office, Hanks Brother True Value, or you can call me at 443-7918, and I'll be happy to help you.
Well, I'm happy both of you all came back. We'll have to have an update a little bit later on, but right now we are out of time. I'm Barry Craig. My guests today were John Robertson and Betty Dobson. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.